everyone, my name is SEFNI Novita Sari. I am an economics student at Universitas Negeri Padang. Now I will explain the material about the introduction of economic development. Please listen and watching this video carefully. The first material about the basic concept and principle of economic development. The nature of development economics. Traditional economics focus on the attention on the allocation of scarce productive resources and the optimal growth of these resources to produce a variety of goods and services that continue to develop. The science of development economics has a broader scope apart from relating to the efficient allocation of scarce productive resources and the sustainable growth of these resources in the future. In brief, the science of development economics focuses on unraveling the mechanisms that make families, region, and even the country as a whole in poverty trap, which is when past poverty causes future poverty and produce the most effective strategy to escape the trap. What is the main purpose of economic development studies? The main purpose of economic development studies is to help us understand the economics of developing countries in order to improve the welfare of the majority of the world population. And then, what it means by development? Development defines as an effort to achieve a sustainable per capita income growth rate. However, along with the development of the times, economic development begins to reduce in relation to efforts to reduce or eliminated poverty, inequality, and unemployment in the context of an increasingly developing economy. In essence, development must reflect change in the total social system in accordance with various basic needs as well as efforts to foster the aspiration of individuals and social groups in that system. Definition of development economics. The development economics is the study of how economics are transformed from stagnation growth and from low income to high income status and overcome problems of absolute poverty. And then difference between development economics and economic development. Development economics is a study on economics knowledge where study matters relating to economic problems in developing countries like Indonesia. And then economic development is process of transition from a certain economic level with a simple pattern to a more advanced economic level. And then there are three objectives of development. First, to increase the availability and the distribution of basic life-sustaining goods. And the second is the rise level of living. And the third is to expand the range of economic and social choice. There are three core values of development. The first is adequacy. Adequacy is the ability to meet basic needs. Everyone has certain basic needs that must be met in order to live life. The basic human needs to support this life include food, shelter, health, and protection. And the second value is self-respect. Self-respect to be fully human. A feeling of worth and dignity not used to achieve other people's goals. All people and society strive to fulfill basic forms of self-respect, namely dignity, respect, honor, or recognition. And the third value is freedom from servitude, the ability to choose free from condition of material deprivations, as well as freedom from social servitude to the environment, other people, and dogmatic belief that poverty is a fate prostate by God. The second material about the comparative development economics. Comparative development economics begins by defining developing country and describing how to measure of development to obtain quantitative comparisons between countries. Define developing countries. To define a developing country is to use per capita income made by the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, better known as the World Bank. In the World Bank classification, 210 countries with a population of at least $30 are ranked based on the level of gross national income per capita as follows. The first is low-income country. Low-income country where a per capita gross national income less than $975. And the second is lower middle income country where the income between $976 and $3,855. The third is upper middle income country where the income between $3,856 and $11,906. And the fourth is high income country. High income country where the income between $11,096 and high income country where the income more than the 11,907. There is a special distinction between upper middle income country and high income country by classifying countries that have success in developing a number of relatively developed manufacturing sectors as namely as a newly an industry country, namely country that have reached a relatively advanced level of economic development, dynamic industrial sector, and closely related to global trade, finance, and investment systems such as Malaysia, Turkey, Brazil, China, and Mexico. Another way of classifying incumbents in the developing world is based on the level of international debt, that is, as very much new, moderately in debt, and low debt. The developing country characteristic. First characteristic is lower standard of living and productivity. Low income country can face a vicious cycle because low incomes can lead to underinvestment in the country. The characteristic number 2, lower level of human capital. Human capital, namely health, education, and skills, is essential for growth. The characteristic number 3, absolute higher level of inequality and poverty. Absolute poverty is a situation of inability or very minimal ability to meet subsistence basic needs in the form of food, clothing, shelters, and basic health services. The characteristic number 4, higher rate of population growth. The high birth rate means that an active workforce of 15 to 64 has to support a large share of the population over 65 years, and children under 15 years, both of which are recognized as a burden of dependency. Namely, the total population aged 0 to 15 and 65 and above, who are considered economically unproductive so that they are not included in the workforce. In conclusion, developing countries are not only characteristic by high population growth rates, but also must bear a greater depends burden than developed country. And the characteristic number 5 is greater social fractionalization. Fractionalization is a significant difference in terms of ethnic, language, and other forms of social grouping within a country. There are three basic development indicators. First, per capita income adjusted for purchasing power. The second is health as measured by life expectancy, nutritional intakes, and child mortality. The third is educational attainment as measured by the level of literacy and the level of education or length of study at school. The third material about the development and economic growth theory. The history of economic growth. The history of economic growth comes from the opinion of experts who then gave rise to the history of economic growth. There are three components of the history of economic growth for each country. First, capital accumulation. This occurs when a portion of income is saved, then reinvested in order to increase output and future income. The third is population and labor force growth, considered as one of the positive factors that can trigger economic growth. The third is technological progress. Advance occurs because new ways are found or improvements or to old ways of dealing with traditional jobs. And then definition of theory of economic growth. Theory of economic growth is what factor determine the increase in output per capita in the long run, and an explanation of how these factors interact with each other so that the growth process occurs. The difference between growth and development. Economic growth is related to the process of increase the production of goods and services in people's economic activities. In economic growth, a production process involves a number of types of products using a number of certain production facilities. And development implies a broader meaning. Increased production is a key feature in the development process. Development is transformation, namely a change in the economic structure of society, which includes change in the balance of conditions attached to the basic of economic activity and the economic structure. And then Theory of economic growth according of expert. The first expert is Adam Smith. Adam Smith, known with value theory. Value theory is a theory that investigates the factors that determine of value or price of an item. According to Adam Smith, economic growth is divided to 5 stages, namely hunting stage, breeding stage, farming stage, trade stage, and industry stage. Adam Smith thinking rests in the acceleration of a country production system, namely the first, available natural resources. Natural resources are the most basic container of production activities a society. The number of natural resources available is the maximum limit for economic growth. The second is human resources. In the process of output growth, human resources have a passive role in that the population will adjust to the needs of labor. And then capital stock. Adam Smith did give the central role to the growth of capital stock or capital accumulation in the process of output growth. What happens to the level of depends on what happens to the stock of capital. And the next, according David Ricardo. David Ricardo growth process is characterized by the following characteristic. The first characteristic is limited amount land. The second characteristic is increase or decrease in power availability. The third characteristic is capital accumulation. And the fourth characteristic is from time to time there are technological advance. And the fifth characteristic is the agricultural sector is still dominant in the overall economy. With limited land, population growth will result in a decreasing marginal product. This is more than the decreasing marginal product, or better known as the law of diminishing return. Capital accumulation and technological advance tend to increase labor productivity, meaning that it can slow down the operation of the law of diminishing return, which will slow down the decline in the level of living toward a minimum level of living. So, with the advance of technology, the work of diminishing return can be slowed down and the decline in wage rates and profit rates toward the minimum level is slowed down. And then according John Stuart Mill, in terms of the talk on the economy, John Stuart Mill was influenced by Thomas Robert Malthus, where economic growth was always overwhelmed by population pressure with constant sources. Mill is a utilitarian who tries to understand happiness differently, where according to him happiness is not only physical but broader than that, and Mill also include a concept of individual happiness which previously utilization philosophy touched less on it. And then according Thomas Robert Malthus. According to Malthus, naturally the population will continue to increase faster than the food supply. Per capita food production will of course decrease while the population will increase. And the next, according Marxist. Marxist emphasizes the description of the development of society from a simple pattern to a society, a complex structure, and a strict division of labors in a capitalist society. According Schumpeter, that economic growth is largely determined by entrepreneurial of ability or entrepreneurship, because it's the entrepreneurship who have the ability and the courage to apply new discover. Without innovation there is no economic growth. And then according Keynes theory focuses on the effective aggregate demand in the country as a strategic variable in overcoming the stagnation of production factor. Effective aggregate demand at home shapes expenditure on consumption, expenditure on investment, and government spending to have a positive impact on economic activity and reduce unemployment. The theory of economic growth according Rostow, known with the linear stage theory, where economic development is a process that moves in straight line and underdeveloped society to a commercial society. The linear stage theory has 5 stages. The first stage is the traditional economic stage. The economy in traditional societies tend to be subsistence in nature. And the second is the precondition stage takeoff. At this stage, the economy begins to move dynamically. And the third stage is take-off stage, a determining stage in the entire development in people's life. The fourth stage is stage toward maturity. This stage is a long-term stage in which production is carried out independently. The stage number 5 is high mass consumption stage. At this stage is marked by the occurrence of large-scale migration from urban centers to the outskirts of life city due to the development of the city center as a center for workplace. And the next theory from Lewis, theory of development, in which surplus labor from the traditional agricultural sector is transferred to the modern industrial sector. And then according Leibenstein, the underdeveloped country are gripped by a vicious cycle of poverty that keeps them around low equilibrium level of per capita income. And then according R. Nelson, a low level equilibrium device for underdeveloped country. And then according Rosenstein-Rodan, known with the big push theory, if a developing country wants to break the chain of poverty, then there needs to be large-scale investment in the industrial sector. And then theory of balanced growth. The basic concept of theory balanced growth is that capital or investment must be invested in various sectors. And then theory of unbalanced growth. Investment or capital is invested in certain strategic sectors which are the leading sector, and this will create further investment opportunities. Dualism theory. The basic concept of dualism theory, two different a stage where one stage is inferior and other stage is superior can coexist at the same space and time. And then dualism grouping. There are four grouping of dualism theory, namely social dualism, technology dualism, financial dualism, and regional dualism. And then the advantage of economic dualism. With the existence of economic dualism, an inferior country can develop its resources well by learning and paying attention to how a superior country manages resources. And then the weakness of economic dualism. First, not uniform public sector development, and the second is imbalance of people income, and the third is unequal welfare of the people, and the fourth is the emergence of national disintegration. And the next is Myrdal theory. The theory put forward by Myrdal is called the theory of economic polarization. According Myrdal, each region has a growth center that attracts labor from the periphery. They are consist of spread effects and backward effect. The first is spread effect, opening up job opportunities in the suburbs, and then the amount of investment coming in, and then marketing of raw material can be devised by residual easily, and then backward effect. And this backward effect, environment damage, and then high crime rate, and then regional imbalance. And then according fairness theory. This theory contains a country that is exists labor and its economy is poor in resources because most of the population move in the agricultural sector in the midst of great unemployment and high population growth rates. There is also an active and industrial sector, and then the development stage of a labor surplus economy. First, the underdeveloped people who do not increase agricultural output are diverted of the industrial sector at institutional waste. The second is agricultural jobs increase agricultural output but produce less than the industrial waste they earn. And the third is which were the end of the self-stage and the beginning of self-sufficiency grow at time when agriculture in labors earn more than industrial waste. The advantage of fairness theory show the importance of agricultural products in raising capital in developing country. The next theory, according Hardt-Dumar theory. This theory analyzes the requirements needed by a country so that the economy can grow and develop in the long run. The main principle of this theory is that the lack of capital, savings, and investment are the main problems of development. If there is capital and the block are present, the result is economic development. And then according John Robinson, in her book, The Accumulation of Capital builds a simple model of economic growth based on the rule of capacity play. And then this model has little to do with shift in equilibrium in a capitalist economy, but is augmented by an examination of properties. The models of development assumption by John Robinson. The first is class liberal economy. The second is in the economy there are only labor and capital as production factor. And the third is national engineering progress. And the fourth, no change in price level. Net national income in the Robinson model is the total wage account plus total profit. Calder's distribution model. The Calder's model is an attempt to make the capital saving ratio a variable in the growth process. And the last theory of economic growth is neoclassical economic growth theory. Neoclassical approach or right goal thinking emerged because they did not agree with too much government interference in socio-economic life. The characteristic of the neoclassical theory: development of production factor and technology. The government is considered to involve the country economy and then analyze the contribution of the development of capital stock and technological developments in economic development. And then indicator of the neoclassical theory is Robert Solow, Harold Dumer, and Schumpeter. And the next material about the economic development problems. The first is development dilemma, consists of economic growth, inequality, and poverty. New concept of development is growth with distribution, poverty, and inequality. An interesting fact related by the World Bank is in the World Development Report it states that numbers of countries whose economic growth rates area could good. It turns out that this economic growth does not necessarily reduce poverty. The income distribution gap remains uncorrected. And then it states that at least 3 billion people of the Earth area still in poverty, only earning less than $2 per day. And then at least this fact is interpreted as a form of divergence between economic growth and improvement in living standards and income distribution. Income distribution. Income distribution types is two, labor income and property income, where the labor income include wage and salaries, benefits, and various other types of labor incomes. Then property incomes include rent, interest, part and saving account, corporate profit, and properties income. And the next is sources of inequality. Inequality in poverty ownership, labor income, because skill work intensity, file of work, and other factors such as environmental malnutrition and education level. And then property income, because life cycle saving, entrepreneurship, and legacy. And then policies to reduce poverty and income inequality. The first is change the functional income distribution. Second, improve income distribution through progressive redistribution of asset ownership. And the third, reduce the share of income of the upper class population through progressive income tax and wealth tax. And then increase the share of income of the lower class population through direct transfer payments and the provision of public goods and services at the government expense. And the next about the poverty. Poverty is a condition where a person does not have enough income, especially to buy basic necessities such as eating, drinking, clothes, and others. According to World Bank criteria, the minimum income per day is $2. The indicators of poverty, first, relative poverty is a person is said to be in the relative poverty group if his income is below the income around him, or in that community group he is at the lowest level. For example, United States. The second is absolute poverty. Absolute poverty seen from the ability of income to meet basic needs. If a person income is below the minimum income to meet basic needs, he is called poor. For example, Indonesia. And the third is cultural poverty. It is related to the culture of the people who accept poverty that happens to them, and they don't even respond to the efforts of other parties who help them get out of poverty. And the fourth is structural poverty. Poverty is caused by an unbalanced structure and economic system that does not take sides with the poor, giving rise to structural economic problems that further marginalize the role of the poor. The impact of inequality and poverty, namely happen the criminality, social conflict, education, productivity, and public sources. And the next material about the population growth and economic development. One of these causes of increased population is technological developments. Population distribution per geographic area is 3/4 in developing country and 1/4 in developing country. And the next, calculate population growth with fertility rate, mean mortality rate. And then difference in population growth. In developing country, mortality and birth rates are high, but the difference between them is lower in developing country. And then growth in developing country, 20 to 40% of the 1,000 population. And then in developed country, less than 15% of the total population of 1,000. And then reason high birth rate in developing country. The Malthusian model and the household microeconomic model. 1. Malthus population environment theory. The number of population in a country will increase very rapidly according to geometrical rates every 30 or 40 years unless surprised by famine. And the second is the weakness of the Malthusian models. First, does not take into account the enormous technological advance. The second is the rate of population growth in country is directly controlled with the level of income per capita of the country concerned. And then microeconomics theory of household fertility. The determination of the family fertility rate or the level of demand for children is a form of rational economic choice for consumers. Then the choice must be obtained of the expense of other goods. The income effect of substitution effect also applies. And then demand for children in developing country. In many developing countries, there are cultural and psychological determinants that greatly influence family decision in determining the number of children, so that the first 2 or 3 children must be considered as consumption goods, whose demand cannot vary responsive to change in relative price, while the fourth child and so on is considered an investment. The next material about unemployment and employment problems. The labor force is a population that has entered the working age, whether they are not working or already looking for work. According to the Indonesian government, the working age is those who are at least 15 to 64 years old. Not all residents who enter the dense age are called the labor force. This is because people who are not active in economic activities are not included in the workforce, such as housewives, students, and income earners. The factors that influence the level of labor force participation are age, gender, and education. And then types of labor. The two types of labors. First, spiritual labors. Workers who in their work activities use more productivity tasks in the population process. For example, managers, director, and other. And then physical labors, where the physical labor is worker whose activities include more productive implementation activities in production. The characteristics of work. The first is full work. If during the week work 35 hours or more, and then half unemployed if for 1 week working less than 35 hours, and the third, half the unemployed critically if for 1 week working less than 15 hours. The labor problems, the first is the lack of sustainability of workers' ability with their work, and the second is low wage received by workers, and then lack of protection of labor, and then less harmonious work relation, and the last is the welfare and health of worker. Kind of unemployment. The first is based on nature. Open unemployment, the unemployment and employed labor force. Second, half unemployment, workers whose work is not optimal in terms of working hours. And underemployment, workers who work not optimally because of excess labor. The second is unemployment based on cause. The first is structural unemployment, whereas unemployment caused by change in the economic structure, for example, from agrarian to industry. The second, frictional unemployment, unemployment caused by sudden shift in the supply and demand for labor. The third is seasonal unemployment, whereas unemployment caused by seasonal change. And the fourth, technological unemployment. The voluntary unemployment. It happens because there are people who can actually work but voluntary doesn't work. And the fourth is technological unemployment. Unemployment that occurs because of the mechanization or replacement of human labor with machine power. And the five, deflationary unemployment, where caused by more job seekers than the availability job opportunities. Cause of unemployment, aspects of population, economy, and education. And then the impact of unemployment, stunted economic growth, the occurrence of social instability, the psychological burden of a new person. And then the role of the government in overcoming labor problems. Job opportunities in Indonesia are guaranteed in Pasal 77 ayat 2 UUD 1945. The role of the government in overcoming unemployment problems. First, expanding employment opportunities and jobs. 2. Improve the quality of personnel. 3. Limiting the use of foreign workers in Indonesia. 4. Simplify the workforce recruitment process. And 5 is stage the wage policy. The next material about urbanization and rural-urban migration. Urbanization is trends and projection. This is a massive and historically unprecedented migration. Economics of location, transportation, cultural life, and skilled workers. Disadvantage is pollution, crime, congestion, and infrastructure. The role of cities. First, agglomeration economics, where cost advantage to producers and consumers from location in cities and terms which takes the form of urbanization economics and location economics. This agglomeration economics come from into form. The first is urbanization economics. Effects associated with the general growth of a centralized geographic region, and then location economics, effects captured by particular sector of the economy, such. Number 2, industrial district. First, firms learn from other firms, and then firms can contract out, marketing advantage, firms can lobby with the government, and then group trust or collective action. Number 3, efficient urban scale and higher price of real estate, and then congestion costs, lower commutes, increased transformation costs, and then increased cost of instruction, namely water and sewage. Number 4, the urban giantism problem. The hub and spoke systems. First, city bias, Causes of urban giantism, namely production for the home market, no adequate middle-sized cities, and then access to government services. And the last is political reason. Number 5, the urban informal sector. The characteristic of the urban informal sector: first, unrecognized, unregulated, unregistered. An example include street vending, carpentry, barbers mechanism, artisans, unskilled workers with no formal education, and no access to capital. And then monopolistic competition, free entry, excess capacity, and low profit. And then mostly self-employed peoples as family-owned business. And then low productivity, low income, no job security, poor working condition, no pensions. And then urban unemployment. The rural-urban migration causes employment and underemployment in the urban areas. Open unemployment rates in urban areas are very high, and then some studies conclude that open unemployment plus underemployment amount to 30%.
Yuka.
Migration and development. Rural to urban migration was viewed positively until recently, and then the current view is that this migration is greater than the urban areas' abilities to create jobs and provide social services. This is a chronic and long-run problem. Well-educated young people migrate to the urban areas, leaving less human capital in the rural areas. Job certain in the urban sector is more difficult and expensive. Migration is a system of and a contributor to underdevelopment. Any development policy that inflates incomes or income distribution will have an impact on migration. Other patterns of internal migration also exist. The next material about the education and health. The central roles of education and health. Health and education are important objectives of development. Health and education are also important components of growth and development. And then about the child labor. Child labor is a widespread phenomenon. The problem may be modeled using the multiple equilibria approach. Government intervention may be called for the move to a better equilibrium. And then the gender gap, a woman and education. Young females receive less education than young males in nearly every LDC. Closing this educational gender gap is economically desirable consequence of gender bias in health and education. Educational system and development. First, distribution of education. Use the Lorenz curve, Gini coefficient. Quality of education, not only quantity counts. The second is education inequality and poverty. About the health systems and development, measure the distribution, disease burden, especially with regard to infectious diseases, AIDS, malaria, and parasites, and then malaria and parasitic swarms, and then HIV and AIDS. Policies for health, education, and income generation. Integrated programs for the promotion of health, education, and nutrition status in poor families. And the last is links between health and education programs and Microsoft EdX programs. This is overall material from me. I'm sorry for my mistakes and thank you for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.